Good morning. Afreich and Zois Chanukah. We begin by thanking our sponsors. We thank Selma Woolf for sponsoring all the Shiurim for the month of Teves, with immense gratitude for the refuos from Hashem and the merit of a refuah sheleima for all those in need, and a zchus for our brave Israeli soldiers and hostages. We also thank Richter and Judy Nudelman for sponsoring Daf Yomi today in honor of the Bris of their grandson, Mazel Tov. Aharon Shmuel. Is he here? There you are, right there. Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov to the parents Yaakov Moshe and Natanya Nudelman. You should have a lot of nachas from all your children and grandchildren. Amen. We also dedicate all the Shiurim of Maseches Bava Kamma to Master Sergeant Eliyahu Harush, Hashem Kamma, who was one of the first officers who was killed by Hamas while heroically defending and protecting Am Yisroel and his community during the fierce battle in Sderot Police Station. May our collective learning bring an aliya to his Neshama and a zechus to his beautiful family. Amen. Today's daf is Bava Kamma Daf Mem Gimel. We did not get all the way to the bottom of the Amud yesterday, so we're going to go back today to Mem Beis, Amud Beis. We're going to pick up approximately 10 to 15 lines from the bottom. There are two dots there, TORAH Rabbanon Vehemis Ish O Isha. So it is precisely 2, 4, 5 lines before the lines start to get wide on Daf Mem Beis, Amud Beis. The Gemara goes as follows: TORAH Rabbanon Vehemis Ish Es Ha Isha. The pasuk talks about if the animal is going to kill a man or a woman. What is this coming to teach us? What is the relevance of the animal killing a man or a woman? If the point is to tell me that there's a chiyuv there's a chiyuv of these payments for a woman like a man, Aryeh kvar nemar. We already know that because the pasuk tells us Ki yigach shar es ish o es isha. We already know that the halachas of men and women are the same with regard to an animal goring. So when it talks about the payment, there's no need for us to repeat this. The halacha would be the same. The Gemara says, "El lahakish isha leish." It must be teaching us another halacha about women, which would be to compare the payments for a woman to the payments of a man, which is ma'ish nizakov liyarshav. Just like when we're talking about payments that are paid for a man being damaged or killed by the animal, that the payments would ultimately be passed on to the heirs, to those who inherit his estate. Af isha nizakov liyarsheha. Same thing would be true that if she's no longer here and able to accept the payments, then it would go to her yarshim. What does it mean it goes to her yarshim? It would mean it would go to her children and not to her husband. The Gemara says, hold on. The Savar of Akiva, Lo Yaris Labal, are you telling me that Rabbi Akiva, who's the one who is talking over here in this brisa, is of the opinion that her husband would not yarshim, would not be the one to be able to collect or to inherit her estate? The problem is, Vatanya, it says in the brisa, V'yarash Oisa, he's going to indeed inherit her. Mikan shahabal yorish sister. We learn from here that the Baal does inherit that which his wife leaves behind. Dibri Rabbi Akiva. And that's clear. Rabbi Akiva says, Samrish Lakish, Lo Amri Ela Bakofer. We're not talking about typical inheritance over here. We're talking about a specific halacha with regard to kofer, to the payment, to the monetary payment that's paid when an animal kills somebody. Hayol ve'enim mishtalim ela la'achar misa v'hava le'roi ve'in habal noter b'roi kibbeh muchzak. The Gemara says this is very different. There's a long discussion in Maseches Bava Basra, which we'll get there in Hashem, and not too long. But ultimately, when it comes to Yerusha, there are two things. There's muchzak and there is roi. Muchzak is possessions or finances or assets that she currently possesses. She has it in her bank account, or she has that money, it's tangible and it's available. However, roi is money that she's deserving of getting. It's befitting that that money will come to her, but it has not yet come into her possession. So when it comes to Yerusha, the Yerusha only happens, an inheritance only takes place at the time of death for whatever is presently there. This payment of kofar the Gemara says, is different than any other type of finances because the money is only what she deserves, but not money that she actually already has. The Gemara explains, my time, why is it true? Because Amar Kra, the Hamas ish o isha. The pasuk is talking about a case where the shar gores, the animal gores, and it kills the man or the woman, as the pasuk says, vim shar nagahu mitzmal shilsham v'huad biv alav v'layish merenu v'hamas ish o isha. We're talking about a wild animal. The owner doesn't do a proper shmir, doesn't watch it properly, and then as a result, what happens? The Hamas ish Elisha goes ahead and kills a man or a woman, and then the pasuk says, "Hashar yisakel," the animal will be stoned, will be put to death. The gam ba'alav yumas, its owner also incurs some type of death, but the death we're talking about is not a physical death, which is rather in kofer yushas alav. It's going to be a financial sentence. There's going to be a financial payment. Now, the clear indication is that first she dies, and then only afterwards does the financial obligation set in. So therefore, at the time that she died, she didn't yet own that money. The financial obligation only comes after her death. So therefore, the husband does not have the rights to inherit that money. It would go to her children instead. The Gemara says, "We've been a zakav lo amar Rabbi Kiva." Rabbi Kiva not say this with regard to other financial damages. In other words, so kofar, you're trying to make this distinction between regular payments and the special financial payment of kofar, as we described a few times, which is a payment that is paid when the person dies. We've been a zakav lo amar Rabbi Kiva v'atanya. Did Rabbi Kiva not say this with regard to other damages? Batanya, we learned in the Brisa, Hika es isha, v'yatzav yiladea, someone strikes the woman and she loses her pregnancy, no say nezek v'tsar le'isha, nezek, the damage, and the tsar, the pain that she had to experience as a result of that goes to the woman. Udmei vlados lebal, and the value of those children that she lost goes to her husband. Ein habal, goes in the yarship. If there's no husband, then it goes to her children. Ein isha, if the woman's no longer here, no senis liarshea, it goes to her children. Haisav shivcha, if she was a shivcha, she was a maidservant, mishdachura, and then she got freed. O giyores, or she's a convert. In any one of those cases, she doesn't have yarshim. Zacha, then, in other words, she's not here. There are no heirs who are able to inherit it. The top of the Gimel Amar Aleph, Zacha, then the one who actually is in possession of the money. In this case, it's going to be the person who struck her. He gets to keep it because who else will get it? He's the one who's holding on to it. So in other words, the point over here is that the same thing seems to be true when we're talking about regular damages. It's not specifically with regard to kofar. The Gemara says, Amar Rav, in that case, it's talking about the grusha. That case is specifically talking about she was divorced. Talking about a case where she was divorced. That's why there was no husband there. The Gemara says, Amri, the Gemara says, Grusha nali to vlados. But when she's divorced, there also should be payments that go to the husband for the vlados, for the children. Now the term tiflog generally means to split it. I don't think that's what it means over here. The way the Gemara seems to read over here is that not tiflog, but rather it should just go to the husband. Now, why would that be true? Rabbi says that the Torah gives the rights of the value of the babies, the fetuses that she ultimately miscarried to the husband. Afilu ba'aleh biznos. There's something very special about that money that the Torah was careful to say that it goes to. We're going to call the person the Baal, the husband, even though we're not necessarily talking about a husband, a legal husband, talking about somebody who is the father, who fathers these children. Even if the interaction, the relationship came about through znus, through an adulterous relationship, or any type of other illicit relationship where she became pregnant. My time Amarkra, what's the reason for that? Amarkra, the pasuk says, Kasher Yashis Alav Baal Ha'isha. The Gemara understands the Baal Ha'isha over here means Boel Ha'isha, the one who ultimately had the intimate relationship with her where she became pregnant, therefore goes to the husband. The Gemara says, hold on a second. Why do we have to say it's talking about where she was divorced? Why can't you just say Kagon Gavu Ma'os, where money was collected, or Rav Nachman Kagon Gavu Karka? So, again, getting back to this Gemara in Bava Basra, when it talks about inheritance, there's different opinions as to what would be collected after someone dies. Again, the concept of mukzak or rai, when there is a loan, depending on what was collected, whether it was real estate that was collected or was money that was collected, there's a difference between Rav Nachman and Rabbi. The Gemara doesn't want to get into that machlokas right now. The Gemara just wants to say, however you're going to hold over there, Rav Nachman could go into Gavu Karka and apply that over here, where that was collected. Amar Rava, like Rabbi says, Gavu Karka, if real estate was collected, Yeshlo, Gavu Ma'os, Elo. And Rav Nachman says the opposite. Rav Nachman Amar, Gavu Ma'os, if money was collected, Yeshlo, then he will get it. Gavu Karka, if real estate was collected, Elo, then he won't get it. Gemara says, Amri Hani Mili Livnei Marava Libed Rabbanon. That whole Gemara was going according to the Bnei Marava, according to the Rabbanon. Ki Ka'amriyacha, Karebi over here, you're right. In other words, if we were talking about the Rabbanon, we would have said that. But here we're talking about a different opinion. We're going according to Rabbi, and therefore we answered that it was talking about a case where she was a Grusha, as opposed to talking about Rabbah and Rav Nachman. That's the Gemara that we really have to catch up on from yesterday. The Gemara continues at the two dots on Mem Gimel Amad Aleph. Amar Reish Lakish. Amar Shimon ben Lakish. Shimon ben Lakish says the following: Shar shehemis es ha'eved, a shar who killed an eved, shalo b'kavana, by mistake. Again, talking about an animal over here, we're not talking about the deepest of intentions, but what it means is it killed the wrong person. It didn't intend to kill this person, but by mistake, it ended up hitting the wrong person. So, shar shehemis es ha'eved, shalo b'kavana, a shar that goes ahead and kills an eved, the servant, shelo b'kavana, pater mishloshim shkalim, doesn't even have to pay the shloshim shkalim. In other words, there's no death penalty for the animal. There isn't either a financial penalty for the owner of the animal. And he explains, Shenemar, for it says in the pasuk, kesef shloshim shkalim yitain la'adonav, the value of 30 shekels should be given to the owner, V'hashar yisakel, and the animal, the shar, will be stoned. And the way he understands this is, Kol zman sha'ashar b'skila, ha'baylim shavim shloshim shkalim. In other words, these two things are dependent one on the next. You can't have one without the other, according to Shimon ben Lakish. If the animal is going to be put to death, then there's going to be a financial payment of 30 shkalim. If the animal will not be put to death, if somehow this animal managed to escape the death penalty, then guess what? The financial penalty goes away as well, because they are two sides of the same coin. They are dependent one on the other, and if there's not going to be a death penalty, there won't either be a financial penalty. Therefore, if the animal killed the wrong person, in such a case there's no chiyuv misa. Under those circumstances, there is not either a chiyuv of the money. So therefore, kol zman shashar b'skila b'aylam shalom shloshim shkalim, ein ashar b'skila ein b'aylam shalom shloshim shkalim. Amar Rabba says, shar shehemis ben chorin. If a shar, this bull, went ahead and killed a ben chorin, a person who's not a servant, not an eved, but it was shalo b'kavana. Again, it was by mistake, killed the wrong person. Pater mikofer. We're now dealing with the kofer payment, which is the payment that would be relevant to killing a ben chorin. Again, the same halacha, pater mikofer. Shneimar, for it says in the pasuk, hashar yisakel, the shar will be put to death. The gam be'alav yumas, and the owner will also incur some type of death. And what type of death is that talking about in kofer yushas alav, which is a financial payment. So the owner is not put to death, the owner just has to incur this financial payment. Again, the same thing is true, as long as the shar is going to be put to death because of its action of killing the person, bailam shalom kofer. However, ein ashar b'skila, ein bailam shalom kofer. If the animal is going to escape death somehow, in this case the way it does it is by killing the wrong person, in such a case there will not be a financial payment of kofer either. Basically, in a nutshell, the Gemara tells us when an animal kills an eved, there's a financial payment of 30 shkalim. those 30 shkalim will only be paid if the animal will be put to death. When an animal kills a ben chorin, a non-eved, then the halacha is there's a financial payment called kofer. That financial payment of kofer, again, is only paid if the animal is eligible for the death penalty. If it's not eligible for the death penalty, then the owners are not going to have to make the financial payment either. The Gemara says, Eitz ve'Abaya. Abaya asks a question on this statement from Rish Lakish. Hamas shori es ploni, a person comes up to Beis Din and says, I've got some bad news for you. My shar killed somebody. Oh, shoro shel ploni. Or it killed the ox, or the bull of someone else, or of somebody else. Halach is hareza mishalem al pi atzmo. This person will make the financial payment by virtue of his own admission. So hold on a second. This is a problem. Because the animal is not going to be put to death on his own admission. So we seem to see a case over here where the person owns up to the responsibility of his animal causing damage. There won't be a death penalty, but still, it seems to say very clearly, this person's going to have to make the financial payment based off of his own word. My love, let's assume that which financial payment are we talking about? Kofer. Yes, the payment of kofer. So this seems to fly in the face of what Rish Lakish taught us at the beginning of this discussion, where he says the financial payment is going to be dependent on the death penalty for the animal. The Gemara says, no, we're not talking about the kofer payment. Rather, we're talking about damin, the financial obligation that comes along with it. Now, what is this damin that we're talking about? Rashi tells us, which is I'll mention this is a very big discussion among many Rishonim, but Rashi and Tosfos on our page actually deal with it. What's the value that we're talking about? So Rashi tells us, just like if my animal causes any type of physical damage to somebody else, I would have to pay the physical damage, the loss in value. So the same thing is true when a person dies. In other words, why should it be that just because a person died, that there should be any reason to assume that the lost value won't have to be compensated? And again, when we talk about the value of a human being, we aren't talking about a value for a human being. There's never a price tag a person can put on a human being. However, if you ever have to come up with some type of value to be able to charge somebody, so then there is a market value for what the person can actually be worth in the business world. How much can this person produce? So if it's true that I cause a person physical damage, physical harm, the person can't go to work, and there's a lost amount of value, so again, not specifically lost wages, not specifically unemployment, but the value that's decreased in this person as a result of that damage, it would stand to reason, says Rashi, the same thing would be true if the person dies. The person dies, and then that payment will be there. That's the damim that we're talking about. Tosfos is very busy with this idea of, if you're going to create a distinction between kofer and damim, what is the difference? And Tosfos comes up with a number of differences. One of them that he says is, some people are of the opinion that the kofer payment that's paid is not evaluated based off of the person that was killed. Rather, it's evaluated based off the one who actually killed. Why? Because the financial payment, as we mentioned yesterday, can be seen as a kapara. So the money that's given is not there to compensate for the loss in value of the person who was killed. Rather, it's there as a kapara for the one who's responsible for the death. In such a case, there would be a huge difference between the damim, the financial amount value that we're talking about, and the kofer. The kofer would be dependent on the one who's responsible for the death, and the damim, the financial damages payment, is going to be dependent on the one who passed away. That's what Tosfos says. Tosfos has another of other differences, but just to bring out what the Gemara means by this concept of, no, we're not talking about kofer, we're talking about damim, there are actually two different discussions of what those payments are. The Gemara says, hold on. If you're telling me that we're talking about the damage value of this person, a Maseifa, let's continue reading what happens over here. Hamas shori es avdo shoploni. Person says, my shar killed the servant of so-and-so. Eino mashalim al pi atzmo. he's not going to pay based off of his own admission. Now, hold on a second. Why not? The idamim, if we're talking about the money for the damages, amai. Why shouldn't he pay? In other words, if we're talking about kofar, if we're talking about some type of financial penalty, a knas, then I understand why, based off of his own admission, he wouldn't pay. But if we're talking about a financial damages pay, if a person owns up to the fact that he owes somebody money, of course he has to pay. So why wouldn't he have to pay? In other words, we're going to have this inconsistency. Amar lei, he responded to him and he said, Yechilno l'shanuyi l'cha reisha damim v'seifa knas. He said, Abai told him, I could really answer that you're right, the first case is talking about damim, money for the damages, and the second case is talking about a knas, a financial penalty, and therefore, based off his own admission, he won't have to pay. I'm not going to give you one of these terutzim that doesn't really work out so well, because it's not so good to say that the Tana of that Mishnah was switching the types of payments in the middle. We don't like to do that, even though sometimes we do. Sometimes we say that yes, two details were mentioned, they were talking about two different things. But we don't like to do that unless we're really stuck. So therefore what he says is, Idi v'idi damin. Both of these cases are talking about damin. Both the Eved case and the case of, remember that the two cases was Shar, and the other case was an Eved. Both of those cases are talking about damin. Top of Gimel Amud Beis, Miu ben Chorin demishalim kofar al pi atzmo. Rather, we're going to find a case where the ben Chorin will pay the kofar al pi atzmo, and we'll explain in just a second. The hechi dami, what is the case? The asu sadi. In other words, just to give an introduction, what we're going to do here is we're going to come up with like a little bit of a hybrid type of case. In other words, there are edim, but the edim are lacking certain pieces of information about the case. In other words, that his animal killed we don't know that only because he showed up and out of his just brute honesty told us what happened. We're talking about a case where, as the Gemara explains, the iasu sadi, if edim would come, v'ashidu bei dekata, they actually testified that his animal killed. However, v'lo yadi itam havi imuad havi. So we're talking about edim show up, and they say, we watched this animal kill, but we don't know the animal's history. In other words, we didn't research the animal's history to find out what it's done in previous days. We're just two guys who were walking down the street, we noticed this animal getting out of control, and go ahead and kill this person. We don't know whether the animal was a tam or a muad. V'amar mare, now the owner actually said, de muadhu. So he actually comes by and says it was a muad. Remember, we talked about yesterday whether a tam is going to make these payments, and we said about Lashar Naki that he won't. So now, the owner actually provides us information about his animal, not information about what it did, what the status of this animal is. So the story is a story that we already know because we had two qualified witnesses that showed up and told us the full story, and we know that the animal killed because witnesses told us the story. However, the witness information was insufficient because they didn't provide the history, the criminal history of this animal. So we don't know if it's a tam or a muad. So therefore the Gemara says as follows. V'yamar mare de muadhu, the owner actually said, yes, my animal is a muad. De mishalim kofar al pi atzmo. And that's going to be a case where he will make the financial payment based off his own admission. Why? Because without him admitting that his animal was a muad, he wouldn't have to make that payment. So therefore, hecha deleka edim, if there actually won't be edim there at all, then mishalim damim, he will pay damim. In other words, the idea is, since we found a case where technically his admission is mechayev him money, so therefore we could say he will pay damim as well. Gabi Eved, however, she'eno mishalim knas al pi atzmo. In the case of an Eved, he will never pay Knas al pi atzmo. Ve'echi dami, what's the case there? The same thing. The asu Eidim. Bas hidu beit the katal. Eidim came and they testified that he killed. V'lo yadi tama b'yumuad habi. We don't know if the animal is a tam or a muad. V'amar mare muad. The owner says, yes, my animal is a muad. Who? Lo mishtalin knas. He's not going to pay knas al pi atzmo because in such a case it's a knas. So therefore, we're going to say if there are no eidim at all, lo mishtalin damim. He won't pay damim. In other words, essentially what we're saying is it's both talking about cases where it is damim. We're not talking about the kofar payment. We're not talking about the financial penalty payments over here. We're talking about the damim, the value, the damages that were done. However, we're explaining why it's going to be a little bit different when it comes to a shar or an eved, because if there were eidim that gave us a story, but they were not lacking very significant details about the shar, so therefore the result will be different. Therefore, it's going to be different when it comes ultimately down to the payment of the damim. Exactly why it's dependent one on the next is a complicated discussion. The Ar Sameach talks about it. I don't think we're going to have time to go through that this morning. Maybe another time we'll get back onto this discussion. He really gets into the crux of the whole concept of what it means, or why a person who's modeh b'knas is going to be pater. Why is that? And there's different opinions, but again, if I want to finish the Yom today, I'm going to try to control myself and not get into this right now. Maseches Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak asks the following question. It says, Kol shechayiv be'ben chorin, chayiv be'eved. Bein be'kofer, bein be'misa. So he seems to equate the whole thing. He says, Kol shechayiv be'ben chorin. Anytime there's going to be a financial obligation by a person who's not an eved, then chayiv be'eved, those same obligations are going to be true when we're talking about an eved, whether bein be'kofer, bein be'misa. Whether we're talking about kofar or misa, or the animal dying. In other words, he's saying not like the opinion that we said earlier. The Gemara says, hold on, kofar be'eved mi'ika? What are you talking about, kofar? In other words, you're equating the opinion, the payments of kofar by an eved and a ben chorin. But I've got news for you. There's no payment of kofar when it comes to an eved. Elolav damim. It must be that we're talking about damim. In other words, clearly, we're not going to be talking about the penalty money. So Gemara says, Ikat Amri, those who say, whom Moshe la, whom Mefarik la. Some say that it was Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak who asked the question, he's going to answer it. Ikat Amri le Rabba, Rabba gave the answer. He said, Hachi, this is what it means to say. Kol shechayev beben chorin b'kavana al pi edim kofer. Anytime we're talking about a ben chorin, a non-eved, and there's going to be a responsibility of payment when it's done intentionally through edim, then chayiv be'eved knas. In other words, what we're equating is that the same thing will be true with regard to the payment of kofer by a ben chorin to the knas, to the financial penalty of an eved. Therefore, v'kol shechayiv ben chorin shelo b'kavan al pi edim, and anything that there will be a chiyuv by a free person, a non-eved, shelo b'kavana, when it's done unintentionally, al pi edim, again through edim, what will be the obligation with their damim? Therefore, chayiv be'eved, shelo b'kavana al pi edim, damim, there'll be a chiyuv for an eved, even though it didn't have intention, al pi edim, damim, there'll be the financial payment. So Amarava, if that's the case, in other words, if that's really true, that it depends on the kavana. If that's true, Amarle Rava Ihachi. If so, Isho by his fire shelo b'kavana, which burnt something that the one who actually ignited the fire did not have intention for. Al pi edim neshalim damim. If that's the case, in other words, if he's stretching this there, then we should say the same thing with regard to Isho, to his fire. If a person makes a fire and it consumes something which he didn't have intention for it to actually consume, if there are eidim there, then Neshalim Damim, he should indeed pay the money for that. Now the Gemara says, okay, who says, Uminav Leila Rava, Delo Meshalim? Who says he's not going to pay if his fire consumes something which was Shelo B'Kavana? Ilema, if you're going to suggest, Miditnan, because we learned in the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? We actually saw this earlier in the Masechta, and it's going to come up later as well. Haya gedi kafaslo. If a person had a gedi, a goat that was tied up, so it couldn't move. The eved samachlo, and an eved was standing nearby something that was ignited. The nisraf imo, and both the gedi and the eved got burnt as a result of the fire. Chayiv. He's going to be chayiv. Why? Because and again, in this case, we consider it as if he burnt whatever it was that he was buying this, but he was burning this gadish, this pile. But he also, it's as if he burned the animal. Why? Because the animal couldn't leave. So he necessarily burned the animal. In such a case, chayiv. However, eved kafaslo, if the eved was tied up there, the gedi samachlo, and the gedi was near it, the nisraf imo, and both of them got burnt, pater. He's going to be pater. Why is he going to be pater in that case? The reason is because kamle b'ravamine. It's as if he actually killed the eved. In other words, that's murder. The eved couldn't leave. He lit that fire. The eved can't leave, and therefore he's chayav misa for it. So what do we see here? We see that there was this is again a case of isho shelo b'kavana, and we said that there is no chiyuv. The Gemara really says, I really got ahead of myself. V'nisrafim pater. Again, it says pater. The Gemara answers that that's not in other words, the understanding at this point was that the Torah, the exemption, the financial exemption, is going to be because it was shelo b'kavana. He didn't have an intention to kill this person. Gemara says, no, that's not true. Amarish Lakish going to heitzes begufa shel eved. The problem over there is he actually burned the eved. He actually lit the guf of the eved on fire, which is terrible to think about. To come lay the reason why there's no financial payment is because he's chayav misa. He killed somebody. The Gemara says ve'ela meha. So it must be that the way that we know that there's no financial payment shelo b'kavana by eish, even al pi edim, is from here. The Tanya, if we learned in the Brisa, chomer ba'eish mi bebar. Eish, as we learned at the beginning of this Masechta, has certain stringencies, certain chumras, more than a bar. Why? Sha'eish mu'edes lechal bein davar haro'ila, bein davar she'ein ro'ila. Eish is considered a muad to consume anything that gets in its path, whether it's something which is roy for it, or it's not something which is roy for it. Generally speaking, eish burns wood, but technically it's a muad to burn anything. Masha'ein came bar, the halacha is, it's only chayiv for the things that are normal. In other words, if a bar is not really deep enough to cause the amount of damage that was done, it's not going to be chayiv. Bedamim, however, when it comes to eish, mishalemesh lo bekavana damim, masha'ein came bebar. Lo katani. Why is, in other words, if you're telling me that it's true that eish will pay shelo bekavana, that should be another one of the stringencies that eish has over bar, and that's not what it says. Gemara says dilmatan bashir. All right, the fact that case was omitted can't be proof positive that there's no chi of mammon, there's no financial payment when it comes to eish. Maybe just left it out. The Gemara says the truth is el rava gufei ibai mi baile. Truth is Rava wasn't making a positive statement. Rava earlier was just asking a question. This was his question. Eisho shelo bekavana mi mishalim olo. An eish that causes damage that was not the intention of the one who lit the fire. Does he pay damim, the value of the damage, olo? And he explains his question. Mi amrina, do we say gavi shar hu divikavana mishalim kofer shelo bekavana mishalim damim? Do we say that when it comes to a shar, if it's bekavana, it will pay the financial penalty, but shelo bekavana, it will pay the financial damage? Aval eisho, when it comes to his fire, the kavana lo mishalim kofer. When it has intention, it doesn't pay kofer. There's no financial kofer. There's no kofer payment when it comes to a fire. So therefore, shelo bekavana, nami lo mishalim damim. Therefore, when shelo bekavana, unintentional, it won't pay the financial the financial damages either. Odilma, or maybe kivan degabe shar shlo bekavana apagav lekakov mashalim damim. Maybe when it comes to a shar, when there's no intention to cause that damage, even though there's no kofar, it pays the money. Gavi ishonami, same thing will be true. Apagav kavana l'mashalim kofar, even though when it comes to intention. So again, it just switches that point. Still, it doesn't pay kofar. Maybe shelo bekavana mias mashalim damim. V'lo yadini, we don't know the answer, and therefore teku, we leave this for Eliyahu Hanavi to figure out for us. Gemara goes on. Kiyasur Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi came around. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. He said the following: Kofar. The pasuk says kofar. Ma taman lomar in kofar. The pasuk could have just said kofar yushas alav. Why does it have to say im kofar yushas alav? L'rabos kofar shalo bekavana ke kofar bekavana. So he says exactly the opposite of what we learned in the previous Amud, and he says that it's not dependent on kavana. Amar le Abaya. Abaya said to Melamiata, if that's the case, Eved nami matam alomar im Eved. If you're going to be darshaning the extra word of im, then let's look at all cases where there's a word in there and darshan that as well. We should say the following: matam alomar im Eved. Why does it say im Eved in the pasuk? The pasuk says im Eved yigach hashar o ama kesef shloshim shkalim yitin ladona v'ashar yisakel. If an Eved was gored by the shar, or an Amma, a female maidservant, was gored, then there's a financial payment of 30 shkalim. So in other words, if you're telling me that you could just darshan the word im kofar yushas alav to tell you that it makes no difference whether there was kavana or not, then we should darshan Eved as well. And we should say im Eved l'rabos Eved shalo bekavana ke Eved bekavana. That if the Eved was killed, whether it was intentional or not. In other words, we should equate the halacha of kofar by a ben chorin to the halacha of shloshim shkalim by an Eved, and in both cases there should be a financial obligation whether there was kavana or not. And if you want to suggest that yes, that's true, he will make both of those drushes. The problem is, Rish Lakish already told us shar shehemis v'sa'eved shelo bekavana patim shloshim shkalim. Rish Lakish already was clear and told us a shar that goes ahead and gores an Eved shelo bekavana without intention, pater mishloshim shkalim, does not pay the 30 shekel. The Gemara says, hold on a second. Is that a good kasha? Amar le, gavra agavra karamis. You're asking a question from Rish Lakish onto Rav Dimi in the name of Rav Yochanan. It's true that Rav Yochanan and Rish Lakish knew each other quite well. He was his TALMUD. But ultimately, to go ahead and say that just because Rish Lakish said something, that means Rabbi Yochanan is bound by that. Gemara says, Ki asa Ravin, when Ravin came, Rabbi Yochanan, he said, Eved mataman lomar im Eved. It says Eved, so why does it have to actually add the word im Eved? L'rabos Eved shelo bekavana ke Eved bekavana. He actually said to include Eved bekavana shelo bekavana, but Rish Lakish nami Nema mid Eved im Eved lo darish kofar im kofar nami lo darish. In other words, you should link both of them together and say both of them. Amri, the Gemara answers, lo, that's not true. Eved im Eved lo darish kofar im kofar darish. He can distinguish one from the next. Why? Umayshna. What's the difference? Why is it that when it comes to im kofar, the additional word of im makes a drasha? When it comes to im Eved, the additional word of im is not darshan. The answer is, Gemara says, Eved im Eved lo ksiv makom tashlumin. When we're talking about the Eved getting damaged, it was talking about the Eved, guess what? Getting damaged. It wasn't talking about the financial payment. It was talking about the Eved getting damaged. So therefore, the word im is not an indication as to how you're going to structure the financial payment. Does it depend on kavana? Not depend on kavana, because that's not what im was talking about. Im was talking about the damage. However, im kofar, necessarily is talking about the payment, because guess what? That's what kofar is. Kofar is the payment. So therefore, the extra word of im, when it comes to im kofar yushas alav, ksiv makom tashlumin, was actually written in the place of Tashlumin. Therefore, that drasha will be made, but the other drasha will not be made. I'm a little bit torn as to whether or not we should go further. We have 3 minutes, but we have about 7 minutes of Gemara left to go. So I think we'll stop here, and Mir Hashem tomorrow, we'll continue from Tan Rabbanan O Ben Yigach, and we'll learn Daf Mem Daled tomorrow. Tomorrow is Shabbos. I think it's the last day that I'm giving Daf Yomi before Rabbi Silver comes back. So again, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to learn the Daf with you in the morning. Prayers from Hanukkah, and have a good Shabbos.